оказывали друг другу помощь и поддержку. Это наследие, уверен, будет нам помогать.
It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue, naturally under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And special envoy of the president, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that it should not the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President.
До завершения конфликта на Украине. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant. But we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, otherwise, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of our debate series. We're broadcasting at a pivotal moment, just as the Trump and Putin summit in Anchorage has concluded, and we've been just following the discussion that has just appeared on the press conference about the first round of the closed-door talks. The stakes are really monumental, a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, recalibrated sanctions, and the unprecedented possibility of a land swap floated by none other than President Trump himself. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, notably not in attendance, has voiced hope for a strong U.S. position, even as he remains an outsider in a process that could reshape his nation's future. And while Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov praises recent U.S. envoy meetings, the true substance of what was discussed behind closed door in Alaska is still actually emerging step by step. We will be discussing all this and more shortly. And let's just dive into the debate right now by bringing our guests. So joining me live from California, USA is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean Professor of International Studies. Hello there, Dr. Hamoud. And also from Dhaka is Dr. Greg Simons, renowned political scientist. Hello there, and thank you for agreeing to be with us.
Morning.
Hello there. And also we will be joined later on from Valencia by Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, international analyst and also a professor at university. Hello there, sir, and thank you for agreeing to be with us. So, Greg Simons, we have just followed the press conference that Donald Trump has held with Vladimir Putin. What is your first take on what is happening on the updates?
Well, it's a very interesting encounter because Trump has actually been following diplomatic protocol and is being unusually diplomatic. I mean, for example, his normal kind of way of doing things is to get on Truth Social and start hammering things, but he has not been on Truth Social for 6 hours. So this is departing from his usual kind of way of doing things. And you can see, I mean, there is an attempt to be a cordial and correct host. I mean, when he met Putin on the airbase, and Putin actually travelled in Trump's limousine. So you have this attempt to kind of ingratiate the United States with the Russian president. And this is interesting, especially given the immense media pressure, because US media and, well, Western media and mainstream politics has been saying how Russia is isolated. So this kind of breaks a number of images and which have been projected. So where we go from here, well, you just seen that press conference, and they've been very guarded what has exactly been said, which should be normal under these circumstances. Western leaders have broken this in the past. For example, Macron spilled the beans on the contents of a private meeting with President Xi once. So it seems there is a genuine attempt to find at least a solution to what the US wants, but are they able to meet a middle way with what Russia's objectives are, especially given Russia is winning on the battlefield?
Mm-hmm. And speaking of this genuine attempt to find a final resolution to this crisis, how do you expect the future of the war in Ukraine after Putin actually agreed that the security of Ukraine should be ensured here?
Well, I mean, if we look at it, what has been said so far, I mean, Trump and the US team have not talked about a peace deal. They've talked about freezing the Ukraine conflict. This is not what the Russians want. The Russians want a finalized peace deal. So you can see this is quite a gulf at this stage. And I think this is what Trump was alluding to when he said, well, we've been talking about some things and some things we need to discuss more. I suspect this is what they need to discuss more. Whether this is a temporary halt, freezing of the conflict, which is what the US seems to want, or whether it's a cessation of the conflict, which is what the Russians want.
But we have seen that this is the first standalone Trump-Putin summit in 6 years. Why do you think Alaska, for example, is actually put here as a symbolic place, and why now?
I think there are a couple of things. Alaska is symbolic because it's the closest geographic point between Russia and the United States. I think that, and it's also well away from Europe and well away from Ukraine. So the possibilities of interference, which has been a hallmark of peace negotiations in the past, is made so much more difficult. And I think the reason why now, we look at the battlefield. The Ukrainian army is in retreat, it's in disarray. The Russians are pushing on the battlefield, and it looks as though that the Ukrainian military is about to fold. And of course, this would be a serious problem for the collective West, because Ukraine has been, as thus far, a useful proxy, something which has been admitted by Rubio not that long ago, that Ukraine is a proxy war. And of course, the main supporter of this has been the United States with its European partners.
Now, maybe many audiences or followers are wondering, why are we trying to put a halt to this war now? I mean, you just mentioned that it was a proxy war, and we see here maybe this war is not in the advantage of any party whatsoever. Now, can you agree, or do you agree with those who say that this war has been just a total devastation for both sides, either the Europeans and the West and the US at its head, and Russia as well?
Well, it's had different results. And Europe has been destroyed by this, by supporting it. Economically, they are a fraction of what they used to be, and deindustrializing and just unraveling. I think the United States has, well, they can't admit it publicly, of course, but the fact that you're having this summit means that it's an indirect way of acknowledging they've lost the war. The United States, I mean, Trump is more pragmatic than previous US presidents, so this is a waste of time and resources. And you can hear from the Trump administration, the main geopolitical object of interest at the moment is China. And while they are tied down in Ukraine and in West Asia, they are completely incapable of having any focus on China. Russia, I mean, it's lost men, but its military is the biggest that it's ever been since the 1980s. And industrial capacity of Russia has been ramped up, which cannot be at this stage matched by that of the collective West. So Russia is in a much stronger position economically, even though it does, of course, have some problems as a result of this, but nowhere near as much as Europe and the United States, of course, with this issue, a matter of political pride. I mean, if Trump loses Ukraine on the battlefield, he is the president who is, it's not remembered as what he calls Biden's war. This war will be lost while he is sitting as president, and therefore would be associated with him. So you have political pride as a factor as well.
Speaking of political pride, now maybe we can mention this analysis or point of view that says This is a peace summit, while many others are calling it a power play. Now, which description fits better according to the place and the time this summit has come?
Well, I mean, it's got the justification and legitimacy cover as being a peace summit, that this will somehow bring about peace. But as I already said, I mean, you got two different visions for how this is going to end up, either according to the US vision, frozen conflict, or the Russian vision, a final solution to the conflict. So this is very much a power play. And of course, Russia is in a much stronger position politically and geopolitically than the United States. Trump has to, he's got a poor hand, to use his terminology, to play, because he's already under a lot of pressure, given the fact that he's meeting Putin on US soil. So he has a lot of criticism coming from not only the US, but European so-called leaders, as well as Ukraine, because you've had these comparisons that somehow Alaska or Anchorage meeting is some kind of analog to what happened in Yalta in February 1945.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of maybe the absence of Zelensky here? What does Zelensky's absence from the table signal? And is it a strategic blunder or maybe a necessity?
No, it's an absolute necessity. It comes to my point that Ukraine is a proxy. Mm-hmm. And the US is treating Ukraine as a proxy, because if Zelensky had agency, which he is trying to project together with assistance from the EU, then he would be there. But the fact that he's not there demonstrates his place. His place is to do what he's told. And we've seen in the White House meeting in the Oval Office recently that he's incapable of playing the role which he should play according to US geostrategic imperatives.
So you think maybe Trump is not really or truly setting the table for Zelensky's inclusion later? Or maybe is Ukraine just being sidelined permanently here?
Well, Ukraine is sidelined, and this is absolutely obvious. First of all, I mean, Trump does not like Zelensky as a person. However, because Zelensky was actively campaigning in the 2024 presidential election against Trump, and Zelensky's behavior in the Oval Office, well, we saw that exchange between Zelensky with Trump and Vance. So Trump is not a person to forgive. He holds a grudge, and Zelensky is one of those who is incurring his wrath. I mean, Zelensky is in a very tenuous position, and we've seen historically what happens to US proxies when they are no longer useful, or they start rebelling against the patron. It ends pretty quickly for them. So, and I think what we've seen recently, when you have Zaluzhny, the former army commander of Ukraine, when he all of a sudden started gaining a lot of favorable press in the mainstream Western media. So this may be a message to Zelensky: do what you're told, otherwise this will be the new Ukrainian president who may be more likely to do what he is told.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of this point in particular, I mean, Zelensky to do what he's told, could a potential land swap scenario, as Trump mentioned, violate international norms and set maybe dangerous precedents?
I doubt a land swap would take place. I mean, this is Trump who's trying to justify and legitimize this meeting. Russia, I mean, why would Russia swap land? They are winning on the battlefield. They have no imposition on them. They are not losing. A land swap would possibly occur if there was a stalemate or perhaps if Russia was losing. Ukraine, or the United States as its patron, are in no position that they can ask, but why would Russia swap land when they're winning, and given the amount of treasure and blood which has been shed for that land?
And do you think, as Volodymyr Zotinkov here says, the recognition of occupied territories is a precondition for a ceasefire? Is that a realistic or acceptable outcome for the US or its allies?
For the Allies, absolutely not. I mean, they've made it clear they want the war to continue. I mean, as I said, Ukraine is the proxy, and you've heard what. I mean, you've heard it from British politicians, you heard it from US politicians and military people, that the Ukraine war is the best value for money because the US is weakening and containing Russia and not losing any American lives. So, I mean, there's no concern about Ukraine. The US, I mean, Trump, I mean, he and his team have more of a focus on China, as I mentioned earlier. So to freeze the Ukraine war from an American geopolitical perspective would be a way that they can try and divert what few resources they have remaining after the arsenals have been drained in the Ukraine war and in Israel's war against West Asia. So this is their goal. I mean, I don't think it's realistic. But, I mean, hope, as they say, is the last thing to die. And the hope is to freeze this and to focus on the most potent adversary of the United States and what is left of its hegemony, and that is China.
Thank you indeed. And Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, international analyst and professor, joins us live via phone. So, Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, my question to you is, after we have seen this press conference between Putin and Donald Trump, do you think US President Donald Trump, as he describes the meeting with Putin, as very productive? Do you think, again, this summit is the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, good evening to everybody. Of course, I think it's great news that President Putin and President Trump agreed on the start to make a peace deal finally, starting from a serious ceasefire. And I think, especially for the civilians in both sides of this unnecessary conflict, it's been great news as well to portray for a future where they can live and coexist together. I think also for Europeans, for us, it's great news, since this conflict is affecting more generally European countries more than the US when it comes also civilian life and also the daily politics, right? I think that's very important. I think the bravery of Mr. Putin going to the U.S. right now, to Alaska, right? And as well from President Trump, the bravery, right, to host President Putin when he's been prosecuted in many states worldwide. I think it's good news for diplomacy. It's back to real politics. It's time when they start to talk about how they can cooperate in the Arctic for economy, for trade. I think that's going to benefit everybody, starting also for Ukrainian civilians, especially.
And do you think that, as Putin emphasized, that he has built a genuine trust relations with Trump that will actually allow the end of the war in Ukraine? And to what extent, I'm saying, this relation will help iron out the divergences here?
I think leadership is very important in solving these kind of conflicts. I mean, in politics, we see this lack of leadership right now, especially in those who are guiding the European Union currently. And you need these big personalities that it was back on the time in France, maybe Sarkozy, in Italy, Berlusconi. These kind of people, back then, they were very, very beneficial to reach deals when it comes to peace agreements worldwide as well. But right now, with Mrs. von der Leyen is a disaster when it comes to diplomacy. Mrs. Callas, as so-called foreign minister of the European Union as well, on her very anti-Russian statement. I think it's time to let U.S. and Russia to come together, mediating about what's going on around the world. We are living in a multipolar world, and I think the Trump administration, especially Marco Rubio and the special envoys he sent to Moscow, they understood that, and they are also involved in India and China in the future. I think in this world full of conflicts, we need more common sense and understanding, and I think President Trump and President Putin are quite on the same line right now, what is good.
Mm-hmm. And earlier I have discussed with Dr. Simon or Greg Simons about the fact that Zelensky has been indeed excluded. Now, how do you, Dr. Javier, see the damaging that is happening here to Ukraine's position in these talks?
But I think President Zelensky, it's like a product in politics, right? If you have followed Ukrainian politics the last years before Zelensky being selected as a president there, his vital CV is not very quite useful to bring negotiations to a good term. So I think we understood European level politics that Ukraine needs a more serious government. Mr. Zelensky will be invited in the next round of negotiations for sure, of course, but Mr. Trump understood Zelensky is making many problems to stop also this war. He's not being very useful. He thought he's a superhero worldwide, taking pictures of military outfit and so on, and that's not being helpful to reach an agreement with the Russians. I mean, you have to understand as well how important is Kiev for Moscow historically, and all these have been left apart on early negotiations on both sides. Mm-hmm. So I think it's time Zelensky be involved, but I think he will be replaced after the next elections because he's making many laws inside Ukraine as a state that even the opposition is very big against him now internally, not respecting the rule of law. And I think all minorities also from Hungary and so on are very, very disrespected in Ukrainian politics. So all this creates a very bad atmosphere for Zelensky to guide good negotiations.
Mm-hmm. But Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, could sidelining Kiev set a dangerous precedent in international diplomacy?
Excuse me again?
I mean, don't you think that this is maybe a dangerous precedent in international diplomacy when we see Kiev being sidelined?
Yeah, well, we have been seeing multilateralism in the last years trying to reach an agreement, but they were not possible. It was a big lack of leadership from European level, also from the Ukrainians. And finally, when we have someone brave as President Trump and also President Putin sitting together to reach a starting point to make a good deal in future, I hope in the next weeks or months, we cannot blame that. I think we have to be grateful to them for this leadership and put a point to Zelensky and European leaders for not being able to offer any real deal. I mean, Mr. Trump today on the plane landing in Anchorage in Alaska, he was saying, well, yeah, I listened to my NATO colleagues, to the European so-called leaders, but they don't offer any solution. And, you know, it's just blah, blah, blah talking, but not offering real solutions, pragmatic on international relations. And that's very a part of the wishful thinking that in the Western world we have had living for many decades, but we are not living in the same world like in the 80s, not even the 90s. New world has emerging powers, the BRICS, the Chinese also making their way in politics internationally with economic diplomacy. And Mr. Trump wants to regain the trust of its own population, making, as he say, America great again. I think Mr. Putin understood with Trump he can reach an agreement, and Zelensky as a minor partner here, maybe unfortunately for himself, but that's the reality also for European leaders. They didn't offer any good alternative, so at least we have to praise the ones today in Alaska who sit together to reach an agreement that will benefit everybody worldwide. I think it's not about American-Russian. It's a starting point where the others cannot add value to the general agreement that hopefully will be beneficial for everybody, starting for the Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm. And let me bring back Dr. Greg Simons. Dr. Greg Simons, we have heard earlier in other developments that Samuel Romani pointed out that Russia has military momentum. Now, does that actually shift the power balance at the negotiating table, and why we see, for example, Russia here in the talks, but we don't see Kiev?
I think this was one of the factors which really pushed. We can remember, I mean, not so long ago, Trump said, I give Russia 50 days to come to some peace agreement. And then this changed to, well, 10 to 12 days, and then 10 days. I think this has been driven by realization that of the trends on the battlefield. And the battlefield has definitely been in Russia's favor. It's from the Ukrainian perspective, the correlation of forces are absolutely against them. Weapon systems are only one thing that they lack, but the biggest problem is manpower, and the manpower has been decimated. And you have figures of at least 1 million casualties dead on the front line since 2022. So, and I mean, you have this reaction by the EU and Britain and Zelensky. They don't seem to understand this. They ignore this basic fact. I think Trump has been perhaps told enough that he understands that Ukraine will soon collapse. I mean, of course, this Russian offensive has been ongoing because you have Ukraine, which is fighting a territorial war. That it's defending its territory and holding every inch. I mean, this is like what the Germans did on the Eastern Front, not 1 inch backwards, not to retreat. But this is not a territorial war from the Russian perspective. This is an attritional war. So to destroy and to wear down the Ukrainian forces until they can resist no longer. And they are close to reaching this point, because you can see all along the front line, there are retreats everywhere. And you have this desperation. This was, I think, one of the main factors why these negotiations, the summit is being held now, to stave off this collapse of Ukrainian forces. Because as I say, it comes back to the point. Trump does not like losers. He is very deriding and insulting about anyone he considers a loser. I mean, you can see how he characterizes his political opponents, how he characterized Medvedev during their social media spat, a failed president. He referred to former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev in their spat. So this loss would, in Trump's own eyes, and I think in the world's eyes, see Trump as the loser of the war if this was finally and decisively won by Russia on the battlefield.
Thank you indeed. And back to you, Dr. Javier Horta-Dumira. Do you agree with Dr. Greg Simons, who says that maybe Ukraine is in no position to negotiate, and could Trump, hence, pressure Ukraine to accept concessions in order to claim a diplomatic win, at least a diplomatic win for Donald Trump, who doesn't want to seem as a loser, as Dr. Greg Simons just mentioned? Well, it seems that we have lost the connection with Dr. Javier Horta-Dumira. Let the technical team handle that tonight. Get back to you, Greg Simons, with a different question. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the negotiating style and political motives behind this. How do you assess Trump's strategy here? Do you think it's something pragmatic, deal maker, or this is just a show? Maybe he wants to win that Nobel Peace after all.
Well, he definitely wants to win that Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, he's bragging about ending 7 wars in 7 months. I mean, one of these wars which he started himself against Iran. I mean, Trump is an incurable narcissist. And yeah, I mean, you can see him pressuring. You saw those comments from the recent negotiations where he forced Armenia, which is now a US client state, to make peace with Azerbaijan. And both leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia were recommending Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. It has no limits. And you can see this in this war. I mean, if he was able to spin any kind of win in this, he would, because he hasn't really achieved anything besides creating a failed presidency so far. His economic war against China failed. His attempts to pressure Russia into submission had failed. Attempts to pressure Iran into submission failed. So you've got all of these different things. And as I said, he's not one to tolerate failure in others, and he definitely does not like the taste of failure himself. So you can see, for example, I mean, even a break of diplomatic protocol, how they met in the joint airbase, where, I mean, Putin was invited to ride with Trump's limousine to the venue, which, I mean, so there was just one-on-one. Well, of course, Trump doesn't speak Russian, but Putin, although English is not his native language and he's better in speaking German, is quite capable of making himself understood in English. So you would have had some things which remain absolutely off the record, what they said in that limousine ride from the airport to the venue. So I think things began pretty quickly, and then we had a 3-on-3 meeting. So, and of course, all the groundwork which came before this, for example, Witkoff's shuttle diplomacy between Washington and Moscow. So you've had quite an unprecedented level of interaction and meetings between the two, which have not existed for a long time. Europe is incapable of this. Europe have done a lot of political virtue signaling that makes it impossible for them to actually hold any kind of meaningful dialogue with the Russian Federation. They've backed themselves into a corner with their bluster and their presumptions that Russia would lose. I mean, and not to mention the absolutely shocking and unprofessional Kaja Kallas, the so-called head of European diplomacy, who's talking about defeating Russia on the battlefield, coming from Estonia. I mean, it's just a ridiculous level of ideological delusion. So, as has been mentioned by your previous speaker, I mean, it's realpolitik, which is returning to international relations after this messianic ideology of this Western global liberalism.
Thank you indeed. And now let me welcome Dr. Hamoud Salhi from California. He's an Associate Dean Professor of International Studies. Hello there, Dr. Hamoud, and thank you for agreeing to be with us.
It's a pleasure. I'm always honored being with you and your guests.
Thank you so much indeed. And my question to you, as we have been following this press conference between Donald Trump and Putin, how do you see this? Do you think it was something very productive, as Donald Trump previously put it after the meeting? Do you think this summit maybe is the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine?
Gosh, those are really, really tough questions. But when you listen to the press conference, what we're hearing so far, it's becoming very clear it's more of a bilateral relations. And this reminder, as someone suggested, during the Cold War, when the superpowers meet, they would divide the regional issues. And the regional issue in this instance is not addressed, and perhaps for the right reasons. The biggest miss in this meeting is in the Ukrainian representative, or for that matter, the European. Before, as we know, before the summit was held, there was kind of attempt at sort of at appeasing, at lowering expectations. And we could see it, that President Donald Trump made sure to say that there will be other meetings. This is just the beginning. But that so far at this point, this has nothing with international order. In fact, the missing of all of this is what's next. How does the world look later? And on the Ukraine, I think it's very clear. Donald Trump said he will be sad if nothing happened. He had sort of thrown a lot of sort of threats before. But President Putin was silent when asked about any ceasefire or any agreement. So I think it's leading. It's all about bilateral relations than regional order or the future of the world.
Mm-hmm. And now, could this summit maybe, as some analysts put it, more of a domestic positioning for the 2024, 2028 than actual diplomacy? I mean, how do we make up Trump's shifting of posture, lavishing praise one moment, issuing warnings the next? So how do we put this?
And you know, the context for this meeting, Karim, if you remember, Donald Trump had threatened Russia or Putin with sanctions, secondary sanctions. And I believe that date was the 14th yesterday. And it was very, very clear that the United States could not move in that directions, because it would mean a sanction in India, putting sanctions on India, for example, and that would drive India to China, which the United States is refusing to do. So this is, on the one hand, to avoid a very, very sort of serious problem, which means, and we've seen this with Donald Trump on so many occasions, not coming through with a threat, especially to Russia. The second thing is that, remember, this is a person who constantly said that he's going to resolve this issue in 24 hours. And then later on, it's more complicated. And then he has been issuing statement after statement, some of them threatening Putin in the context of what's happening in Ukraine. But in reality, that sort of got him or got the United States in trouble, because somehow he lost confidence. We lost confidence in the ability of Donald Trump to resolve this issue. Now, short of a miracle, something could happen, but there is nothing at this point. Within his base, reference to your question, remember that Vance, the vice president, is the one who went and when Zelensky came to the White House, he's the one who created that whole issue about we can't spend any money. You have to pay us for what we provided of assistance. So within the MAGA base, if you want, there is a division between a group that wants to really stop these wars and not be participant in international conflicts and stay away from it, and there is another group that seems to be leaning toward giving more supporting Trump regardless what he do. So he's trying to be balancing that out. Yes, of course, it has to do with the elections coming up in 26 and the future 28. A resolution of the conflict will mean a lot to Trump. Needless to say, the other meaning to Trump is that, Nobel Prize. He wants to project this idea that he's a man of peace. Maybe so, maybe not. But in this context, we have not seen any sign that this is going to a resolution of the Iranian conflict, of the Iraqi conflict.
Mm-hmm. And back to you, Dr. Greg Simons. In previous meetings, and I have just told Dr. Hamoud about this, Trump has both praised and criticized Putin. What might explain this dual approach, according to you?
Well, it's a very tactical approach, because it's shifting with how politics and geopolitics are shifting. He praises when things seem to be going Trump's way, when obstacles are put up and a country reasserts its sovereignty and does not submit to being a US object of international relations, but prefer to be a sovereign subject of international relations, then they get criticised. So this is, I mean, it kind of reminds me that Trump seems to think he is somehow teleported back to his days running that game show, The Apprentice, where Trump was in charge and everyone would do what Trump says. He's the boss. I think that this is reflective of that particular attitude. I mean, some call it mercurial behavior, but it's a very adaptive one because he's not ideological. He's pragmatic, and things concern not national security or the interests of the United States, but so you don't have the substance, but it concerns the performance and the perception of Donald Trump. And this is reinforced by his ardent desire to coerce as many people as possible to have him nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I mean, given by the fact that Trump has been starting wars, this puts him in a good position, because if we look at the last more recent nominations for Peace Prize, like Obama, one needs to have started at least one war to be eligible for the Nobel Peace Prize these days.
Mm-hmm. And how much is Trump ready to pay to get that Nobel Peace Prize? Dr. Hamoud Salhi, there are rumors of U.S. offering access to Alaska's rare minerals. Even if denied, could Arctic resources be used here as a leverage?
Well, you know, again, that puts really in the bilateral relations, and how much of that the United States is leveraging to achieve other results. I don't know how, after all, remember, Alaska used to belong to Russia, and it was sold to the Americans, so anything is possible there. But the issue, Karim, is a very, very serious one. And we do know that Trump wants this huge, you know, it's all about me and conflicts. He's a man who likes to see conflicts and does things to always agitate other people or other nation, and as I've seen it with the tariff, with no consideration to international law or principle, everything evolves around Trump. But that's his style, that's how he works. But in here, we really, I mean, it's a very, very serious issue, and it will be difficult to resolve it because the two parties, the main essential parties, have a huge stake in this. For example, the Russian on the one side, in the Ukraine, they want assurances that their national security is protected, and they believe that a buffer, that Ukraine being deneutralized or and not a member of NATO will serve their purposes. That's how they will achieve their national security. Well, the European and the Ukraine disagree. They think that the Russian are the threat, and we need to be a member of the NATO and build a strong might in order to counter what they believe or they think what they perceive as the Russian threat. And that's really the difficult job of President Donald Trump. He should find a way of how to guarantee certain kind of assurances to the Russians that their national security is protected while protecting the interests of the Ukrainian and the European. Sadly enough, the United States doesn't have a good record. It lost credibility when it comes to what's happening in Ukraine. And those are really the difficult issues. So what we are going to see, if we are to predict, is continue the status quo, perhaps continue the war, the conflict continues, or achieving certain kind of ceasefire for whatever reason, but the status quo will continue. And that sort of is a result of what's on the ground. In the meantime, I think it's a good idea that the Russian and the Americans are looking for ways to work together. So the bilateral bilateral relations could be a step in the right direction, that in the future we will be talking about nuclear facilities and nuclear treaties. In fact, one of the nuclear treaties is expired, and there is no sort of plans to renew it. Another issue that is very important, and we tend to forget this, is what's happening in the Middle East. The huge interest that Russia has in that area, and more than anything else, I mean, for this giant to meet, and there is no discussion or a plan to have Gaza on the agenda, it speaks volume to the self-interest and the self-agenda these two countries have in mind. So it's not about the global order, yeah.
Absolutely. And just to bring back Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, there is a speculation about offering Russia access to Alaska's rare minerals, even though officials are denying it here. Could resources be used here as informal leverage, and would such a move risk alienating, let's say, U.S. allies or even Congress?
Well, I think it would be a good so-called excuse to improve the relations bilaterally between U.S. and Russia. But I don't think Russia needs as much Alaska some resources as U.S. needs some Russian soil for investment, minerals, and rare earth, as they say. I think it's also important to remember that a few minutes ago, I mean, President Trump praised the business Russian delegation in Alaska. So it means there's a lot of things are going around economy and business. I like this approach from President Trump because he, as Mr. Simon also commented, right, he's a pragmatic person when it comes to the approach of these bilateral relations. Also, as our previous colleague was commenting on the Arab world and the Middle East, there is interest in Russia as well. So in the next hours, we will see how many of the colleagues, you don't bring the delegation that Russian government brought, and also the same from the Americans, unless you have reached previous agreements in Moscow and in Washington, D.C. And only we need some time to understand what's going on behind. It's a matter of discretion. I mean, if you are discreet, it's normal now. I understand media, and many of us also in academics and politics, we would like to understand all details, what they are commenting indoors and out of the media coverage. But we can understand that a lot of things, the last trip a few days ago, Winkov, the special envoy from Trump, talking directly with President Putin in Moscow in the Kremlin, it means there is a trust created for negotiations that are convenient for both sides. And I think Alaska, historically, of course, Russians miss it because it was a kind of nostalgia and understand this territory. But if we go back to history, we understand borders have changed frequently because of wars, agreement, selling, trade. And in Alaska case, for example, for Spaniards was one of the first settlements in the U.S. soil before U.S. was even thinking to be a country, right? So I don't think Russians need especially economic investment in Alaska or some resources from them with minerals. But of course, maybe it appears on the map that they have a win-win situation on many trade deals that.
Absolutely. Here, Dr. Javier Hurtado Mira, international analyst and professor, thank you so much for all your analysis. Dr. Greg Simons, a renowned political scientist, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us. And also for you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, thank you for your precious time and your analysis. And for you, dear viewers, of course, we will continue other coverages on this issue and others. So stay tuned to our 24 News channel. And goodbye for now. And this is just in. 18 people have died in a passenger bus accident in Wad al-Harrash, Algiers, according to a statement from the Algerian Civil Protection Services. The statement said the accident occurred when the passenger bus veered off course and fell from a bridge into the river Bad in the municipality of Al-Harrash, east of the capital. The incident resulted in 18 deaths and 9 injuries, including 2 in critical condition. And on this sad occasion, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune has extended his condolences to the families of those who lost their lives in the passenger bus accident that fell off the bridge into Wad al-Harrash riverbed in the capital. In his message, President Abdelmajid Tebboune voiced deep sorrow and grief over the tragedy, offering his sincere condolences and heartfelt sympathy to the victims' families. He prayed to Almighty Allah to grant mercy to the deceased, welcome them into His vast paradise, grant patience and strength to their loved ones, and ensure the swift recovery of the injured. And on the same occasion, President Abdelmajid Tebboune has declared a one-day national mourning in solidarity with the families of the victims of the passenger bus accident. A statement from the Presidency of the Republic said that following this disaster in Wad al-Harrash, which claimed the lives of 18 citizens, the President of the Republic decided in solidarity with the victims' families to observe one day of national mourning, starting this evening with the national flag flown at half-mast. The end of our flash news. Thank you for watching and goodbye.